Welcome to this Phi Beta Mu Legacy Project interview. I have the pleasure this morning of introducing to you Hall of Fame member, Dr. Johnny Jacobs. Johnny, welcome.
Thank you, Frank. Glad to be here. Good to see you.
I was just thinking, how long I have known of you. And gosh, I guess it goes back over, 50 years now. I was a little seventh grade. Well, had just come out of seventh grade. Had just come out of beginning band. Our county was having a week-long summer band camp, and Jerry Bobo and you did the junior high band. And that was my introduction to Johnny Jacobs way, way back then. And then you're one of those that I just kind of continued to follow. As I wanted to be a band director and was looking at those who were successful, you were one of those. So
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Definitely my privilege to be with you here this morning. So let's go back to the beginning. So how'd you get into music to start with as a youngster?
Well, I started when I was 10 years old in the fourth grade, but we only had band a couple of days a week, and it was only one semester. So, that didn't amount to much. We got a different band director the next year who was a string bass player in the Birmingham Symphony. And he knew about as much about trumpet playing as I knew then about playing the string bass. And so I wasted a lot of time trying to roll both lips inside my mouth and make a sound on the trumpet. And I just went rogue on the band director and decided it wasn't going to work for me, and left both my lips outside my mouth and began to make a sound. And so I began to make a little progress. But then next year in the sixth grade, a young man who just got a music degree from the University of Cincinnati named Ronald Balloon came to the little high school I went to, which was Warrior. I still live about 3 miles from Warrior High School right now, except it's not a high school anymore. But he had just gotten a degree from Cincinnati Conservatory. He was from New York originally. He came down here to play second trumpet in the Birmingham Symphony. And so I was exposed to a pro as a teacher from that point on. And he really was a disciple of individual instruction, and he taught all of us individually. And so I got trumpet lessons from a professional trumpet player for the 5 years that he was there, and I fell in love with it, and that was the start of
it. That's great.
And by the way, we had a really unusual band there at Warrior High School. It was a Class C school. Grades 7 through 12 were in his band, and while most of the Class C bands were playing Three Gates of Gold and Activity March, we were playing Amparita Roca and Morning, Noon, and Night, like the big boys played, and so that was a blessing also.
Well, I guess the individual instruction. So developing good players, and good players sit down together and can do some wonderful things, no matter what size the school is.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, that's great. And so then, so Warrior, and then where for the collegiate work?
Well, my father had become friends at Warrior. He was on the faculty there with a man named Ralph Tanner, who eventually became the president of Birmingham Southern College. And so we kind of used that relationship to parlay a deal that we could afford that would let me go to Birmingham Southern. The downside of Birmingham Southern was they didn't have much of an instrumental music program. In fact, I was the only trumpet player on campus. But the good side of it was there was a trumpet player in Birmingham named Walter Meck,
Mm-hmm.
who
That name's very familiar.
was very well known. In fact, was offered the principal trumpet position in the Minneapolis Symphony before he came to Alabama, but he really had the conductor's itch. And he felt like he had proven himself as a trumpet player at the Eastman School of Music, where he was top dog for 4 years. And he went to Iowa and got a degree in conducting, and he wanted to be a professional conductor. So he came to Alabama to conduct the University of Alabama Symphony. So he exchanged the first year in Minneapolis to come in to conduct the orchestra at the University of Alabama. And he ended up, though, commuting to Tuscaloosa from Birmingham because he was playing playing principal trumpet in the Birmingham Orchestra. And my band director in high school had played second with him. So I studied privately with Walter Meck for 3 years. So that made up for the lack of the WIN pedagogy program at Birmingham Southern. And, I got good playing experience because he had recommended me for jobs in the town. So I had played with the pros a lot during those years. And so I made up for not being in a college band somewhere.
Yeah. Many years ago, Larry Liberty told me a story. He said that there was a decision before you. Am I going to be a performer? Am I going to go into teaching? And is that kind of bring us up to speed on that?
Well, deep in my heart, I always wanted to be a band director. I remember a conversation I had with my piano teacher when I was in the 6th grade.
Wow.
And I was going to quit piano. And so I was telling her that this would be my last lesson, that I was going to stop taking piano lessons. And she was very upset. And so she asked me why. I told her because I want to be a band director and I need to spend all my time practicing my trumpet instead of dividing my efforts. So that was always in my heart, but I love to play as well. And, there were people, including Mr. Meck, that had encouraged me to pursue playing. And after teaching for 2 years, I went to the University of Illinois with the intent of getting a performance degree, master's in performance, and got some encouragement there from the trumpet teacher, which was Haskell Sexton. He'd been there for years and became real good friends with him. But he encouraged me also. And so that put some doubt in my mind because I really love to play. And I competed pretty well with the trumpet players at Illinois. So, I began to have some second thoughts, but about maybe wanting to see what I could do in professional playing world. And but Uncle Sam helped me change my mind there because I had come home for a visit after the first summer up there, and my landlord in Champaign called me on the phone. We were staying at my folks' house and told me that I had a letter from Uncle Sam in the mail, and it was a reclassification for 1A. So at that point, it was either come back to Birmingham and teach at Dixie Junior High School or go to Vietnam. So I chickened out and decided to come back. I also realized at some point, I don't remember when, that there wasn't a lot of security in the professional playing, and that
It still isn't.
you know, you were only as good as your last splattered note. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
And I realized that there, I was knowing about a lot of these principal trumpet players in major orchestras who, after so many years, were moving down to third trumpet. I began to question why they were doing that, and so it was to escape the hot seat. And so, but again, during that time, that third year that I taught, things really clicked in with my band at Dixie Junior High, and they started sounding real good, and I began to enjoy that more and more. And that, coupled with the knowledge that you were only as good as your last concert, and that I knew I had potential, but I was not a phenom. And I realized that I really was better at teaching than I was playing. Still love to play, still do. But that made the decision for me after that third year of teaching, and things began to go so well, and me comparing that with the prognosis of always being on the hot seat and never having proved yourself. Every concert you got to prove you're a stud. And so I was having so much fun being a band director that it was pretty easy decision after that third year.
Yeah, that's great. So how many years there at Dixie before you went to minor?
I was 4 years at Dixie and went to minor the 5th year, but there was a bad teacher shortage at that time. And so actually we couldn't find anyone to take my place at Dixie Junior High School. So I did both bands that year.
Wow.
I did Dixie and minor in that 5th year that I taught. And then I had a permanent substitute teacher that had graduated from the minor band, who helped me that year with the junior high school, and I, of course, did all the major classes at both places.
Yeah.
But then the next year we were able to get a full-time band director for the junior high, and so after the 5th year, I was at minor full-time.
Yeah. Wow. That's great. And of course, I think you're probably best known for, those years at minor. I remember some of those performances at state contest, and really, really, really fine. And you were there for how long?
Well, I was there for 17 years at minor. So I was there on that campus for 21 years. And then I was at Hewitt-Trussville Middle School for a semester.
I remember that.
Another year and a half at Berry High School. Mike Mayhall, who had been my assistant at one time, he left in the middle of the year, and Berry was in the same system, school system, and so I transferred and was there a year and a half, and then took over for Larry Deegan as a supervisor, and then did that for 13 years.
Yeah. And now, when did you get your doctorate? I'm trying to think where that came in the mix.
Well, let's see. I got the diploma here on the wall. Let me look up here and see the date. I graduated in 1985. I had done some coursework at the University of Illinois. I intended to get the doctorate there, but this is kind of humorous. I went to I told you about going to University of Illinois in 1966, thinking I was going to get a performance degree in trumpet. Came home after that semester. Well, I decided I wanted to pursue a doctorate, so I was going to start I started back to Illinois to pursue a doctor's degree there. And after going a couple of summers, I began to sense some competitive tendencies between members of the faculty. And they were taking their animus for each other out on their doctoral students. You know, if you give my guy a hard time, I'm going to give yours a hard time. And also I had noticed that when I went back, this would have been something like, I'd first gone there in 66 and went back to start the doctorate, I think, in 71. And it dawned on me that I was seeing in 1971 some of the same doctoral students that were there in 66, still trying to
Still
get
there.
out. And so after, so I decided after going back up there about 4 summers that I could not leave my income with the prospect of being victimized by the internal jealousy of the Illinois music faculty. So I came back to Alabama and finished the doctorate at Alabama, and I graduated that in 85.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I remember
I have
when
the advanced certificate in music education from Illinois, so I didn't leave there empty-handed.
didn't leave empty-handed.
I'm officially an alumnus.
I remember going to Midwest one year and somehow I was in the van from the, you know, hotel to the airport or something. And Harry Bejan happened to be in the same van. And we introduced ourselves to each other. And when I told him I was from Alabama, the first words out of his mouth were, "Well, do you know Johnny Jacobs?" I said, "Well, yeah, I believe I've heard of him somewhere there." But he had good things to say about you. So
well, I appreciate
left
that.
him with pleasant
It's
memories.
mutual. You know, that was another thing that made, I could never say my time at Illinois was wasted time, because the man, he was a giant, just like my trumpet teacher, Walter Meck.
Yeah.
And Dr. Bejan helped me with a lot of things, just because I took his class every summer. I took the same class 4 times. somehow I got credit for it every time. I don't know who arranged that, but it was awesome. He was certainly an icon and a giant. The recordings that he did with the Illinois band during his tenure there actually surpassed, in my opinion, all those records that Mark Hinsley had made prior to Dr. Bejan going there. So there's a tremendous library of the classic, which includes all the old traditional warhorse transcriptions. And
oh yeah,
Bejan did those and was fantastic. And then he had that time also had the commissioned Alfred Reed to do the Armenian dances, parts 1 and 2. And so that had happened about during the time I was going to school there. And, you know, to study those pieces with him was quite a treat, because Dr. Bejan was an Armenian himself. And so he did his doctorate on Armenian folk songs. And then he commissioned Dr. Reed to do 2 suites of dances based on those folk songs. And of course, Dr. Bejan had a real understanding of what those were all about, being a native Armenian himself.
Sure. Tell us about the dissertation, because if I remember correctly, it was a very interesting one.
Well, it was on beginning band. And the basic precept was that kids are attracted to band because I think all human beings have some attraction to music innately. And it's the musical part that attracts most of them to want to play. Now, I know there's some exceptions to that. Some do it for social reasons. Some do it because they hear about all the glamorous trips that the band is taking. But at the root of it, I felt like that most of them start in band and stay in band because of the musical attraction. And yet beginning band turns out to be nothing but that. You put the horn on your lips and you play a single note for 4 taps of the foot, and then you stop for 4 taps of the foot. And you do that for several days, and then maybe you get to half notes. And so you play the half note for 2 taps of the foot, go to another half note, and then stop for 4 taps of the foot. And there's a static quality to that. And music's not static. Music is about movement and change and contrasts. And so the kids get all revved up, and you go to horn night. The dealer got all the horns out, and they're shiny, and the dark blue velvet lining in the cases, and everything is, they get real excited about the idea of playing. And then they go to band, and for 2 or 3 months, what they do is work puzzles. I put fingers down and play for 4 stomps at the foot, and then stop. And there's nothing musical about it. Nothing musical about what happens in the first several pages of the beginner band book. So my idea, I kind of stole it from Orff and what they do with the elementary music. They give them these little keyboard instruments and take all the bars off them if it don't fit in the pentatonic scale. So anything that they hit with the mallet is going to
sound good. Yeah.
Going to contribute. And so they have the little rhythmic patterns, and they do the little things on the xylophones, and it really does produce a musical fabric. And they have a lot of fun, and they can do it from day one. And so kind of stole that idea and said, well, I wonder what we could do with beginning band that would be kind of like that. And so I decided that what I would do was I'd have the main part of the musical texture provided with a synthesizer. And I had programmed all the different orchestral sounds into a synthesizer, and the main melodies and rhythms were played by the tape of the synthesizer, and then the band part would frankly not usually be the melody. But it would be a component to a more complex texture, and they could be actually participating in something that sounded like music. And so I did probably 40 of those vignettes, I would call them, where it was the band. Sometimes the band did play the tunes, most of the time it didn't. And so the idea was to get them doing something that was where they were really participating in a musical context from day one, and that it would give them more reinforcement for what they were actually doing in the class. And then the idea was that we would give them a pre-test and post-test, and I developed an attitude assessment instrument, and we gave them the attitude assessment instrument at the beginning and the end, and then the Watkins Farnham performance test, the pre-test and post-test, and compare their attitude and their instrumental progress in an experimental group, a control group, and to validate that that this could be done. And it was, statistically right on the border, but we were able to prove that it did affect their attitude towards staying in band the next year. So that's basically what it was. And we got, I still, some of my friends still use that book. Nick Williams is using it at Bragg right now. Jody Foster's using it at Liberty Park. Mike Holmes, of course, the famous beginning band director guru of all time.
Oh yeah. Well, I remember for some reason I was visiting him and he told his band, he says, get up the Johnny sheet. And that's what I said, Mike, what's a Johnny sheet? Well, it was something that had come from you.
What everybody calls it now. And I still get chuckled every time I go to both those schools once a week. And when I hear it through the practice room door, I always get a laugh. I still sounds pretty good, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Even though I think most people, when they think of Johnny Jacobs, they think of, that minor high school band, and your work with more advanced literature, but there seems to be this real love of young players, as you refer to Dixie Junior High. And then I remember an article you wrote when you went to Hewitt-Trussville Junior High, when you left minor after all those years to take a junior high job. And I remember an article that you wrote in the Olive Brev talking about how much you were looking forward to sort of going back to those roots. My kids, as they would play for you at solo and ensemble, the emphasis on fundamentals, it just seemed there's a real love there. And tell us about sort of the team teaching thing that you ran at minor in Bottenfield and what was that other feeder junior?
It was Edgewater.
Edgewater. Yeah, because I know back at that time, a lot of people were really looking at that, the way that you did that, as the way things need to be in other places.
Well, I certainly believe in that because, too many, and I don't mean this as a criticism. I'm not trying to be critical to anyone, because I probably was the same way to a certain extent. But I think taking where we started this with this chat we're having about my experience, the band director at Warrior High School, he went to the Cincinnati Conservatory. What is the difference in a conservatory and other institutions? It's individual performance training. Mm-hmm. And so that was his idea of teaching. Of course, that wasn't far removed, because, when I started, class instruction has not always existed, like teaching people to play in a band class. And at Warrior High School, he started the beginners all on private lessons once a week, and then he put a beginner band together for the springtime. In other words, you learn how to play and then get in the band. What an awful idea, instead of getting a horn and joining the band that day. And so I grew up with that model in mind, that kids needed individual help. And I still believe that today.
Absolutely.
That you can't do everything from the box. You can't do everything from the box and do it thoroughly and efficiently. And so the team teaching idea was that we'll have one guy on the box and another one or two guys in the practice room teaching the kids how to play, teaching them the fundamentals. And I realized after doing that a while, Frank, that those years when I had taught beginners at Dixie Junior High School, that's what I was doing from the box. I still remember the first few days of beginning band. There'd be some kids that, and this goes back to the problem I was talking about the philosophy of beginning band. But I have to go. You were great with your beginners, and I'm sure you'll bear me out on this. There were some days you spent going around and listening to kids play one at a time, with all the rest of them sitting there watching. I had to still, even though there's a room full of them, I still felt like I had to see if those flutes were all had the head joint in the right place and had the hand position in the right place, and could play high F and low F both.
Absolutely.
I still had to.
Kids can hide so easily.
That's right.
You know, and yeah, my goal in beginning band was always I wanted to hear everybody play by themselves every day. If it wasn't but two measures, all right. You know, let's play line 5. Let's hear everybody on the first 2 measures, the flutes on the next 2 measures, Susie on the next 2 measures, and Bill on the last 2 measures.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly.
Yeah.
And that's, I believe that I know that things have changed in the way the schools are set up schedule wise. I thought when the block schedule hit the Jefferson County school system, that was a sad day. I know it gives everybody an extra 30 minutes in their band rehearsal, but it also eliminates some possibilities for seeing kids in smaller groups and individually. And so what we did at Minor, we moved all the classes at the high school classes to the first half of the day. And then we went to the junior highs in the second half of the day. And after this conversation, you won't be surprised that my duties at Bottenfield Junior High School were I took over the beginning band program. Not that Harry McAfee wasn't doing a good job of it, but I felt like that, well, a little bit of an ego problem probably here, that I could do beginner band the best of the 4. And so so I was going to take the beginner. So I did the advanced band, which we called the purple band at the high school, and beginner band at Bottenfield. And then my sectional rehearsal assignments was once a week at the junior high, I had the clarinets one day, and the flutes one day, and the horns a third day. And Harry did the trumpets, not me. Of course, Harry's an awesome trumpet player, as I'm sure.
He is. Yeah.
So that's basically what we did. It was say, look, if we stay together all day, we somebody can be teaching the band, and 2 or 3 other people can be teaching kids. And we did a lot of it's playing one-on-one. And I tell you what, after we did that for a year, we didn't have any of this business about kids coming to the high school and not being able to play. We would always get, before we did that, we'd always get a few horn holders every year that we're trying to, teach how to, I had to teach from scratch. And I said, hey, this is no way to do this. We got to teach these kids how to play before they get here. Of course, and we eliminated that by the team teaching concept, because we could make sure we were getting to everybody with those fundamentals. Let me add this though. Just because you do that, you can't quit working fundamentals in your whole group. You have got to do the fundamentals individually, but you got to practice them together as well. And whatever you want your kids to do, you got to work on it in band class as well as one-on-one. Somehow there's if you don't do that, there's gets a psychological gap here that, well, you know, the application of this, where's it going to happen? It's going to happen. The application of it's going to happen when we're all playing together. And so you got to work on tone. Got to work on characteristics known in your band rehearsal too. But I was always good at teaching the individual instruments. Thank the Lord. Thank Him for everything. Thank Him for in this interview. My world view is a biblical view. And you know, let me say this too. We can't forget that music is there's a lot of academics. Music is an academic because you got to understand the theory of notation. You got to know, you know, something about melody. There's academic type principles involved with that. You got to know the intonational tendencies of their instrument, which is academically a product of the fact that all the instruments work on the overtone system, which God set up, but the scale we play in is a mathematical system that man set up. And so because of that, no instrument comes from the factory in tune. And all the trumpets are going to play flat on the fifth partial. All the flutes are going to play sharp on the C and the C sharp. Yes. You know, it's made by the left-hand fingers only. But those kids have to be taught that. It's an academic thing. Then you've got it's also an athletic thing, because you know you were training the body to do something it wasn't born knowing how to do.
That's right. So
anytime you're doing that, it's not all that much different from working out in the gym.
It's muscle development.
That's creating that muscle memory and muscle strength. It's also the aesthetics. I think this is where a lot of people, and it's unfortunate, they forget that it's an aesthetic and a spiritual endeavor as well. And if the emotion of the music doesn't get to the kid, he loses the real reason for trying to make music. And you know, there's the emotional and the spiritual. You know, we're spiritual beings. A lot of people don't think of it that way, but I hear some preachers time that make this point, that this body I'm in is just my earth suit. You know, like space travelers have a space suit. I've got an earth suit. I'm a spiritual being, but I've used this earth suit to have motion in the earth, and to do works and do tasks in the earth. And you know, read the Bible and you hear about in the Psalms, praise Him with the trumpets, the timbrel, and the dance.
That's right. Yeah.
Praise Him with an instrument of 10 strings. Then you get in the New Testament, and Paul talks about be filled with the Spirit and singing it to each other, and with hymns and psalms and spiritual songs, making melody in your heart to the Lord. My point with that is it's an emotional thing, and it's a spiritual thing. You read in the book of Revelations what's kind of going on up there in heaven with the singing that's going on up there, and they were talking about spirit beings doing all this singing. Well, my point in this is we can't ever forget that the ultimate goal is spiritual and emotional expression. If all we do is the academics and the athletics, we've really missed the point unless we get to where the reinforcement that the children have from playing in the band comes from the enjoyment spiritually and emotionally. We're designed to respond in that way. And we've got to do it. We've got to do it all. We can't neglect any of those areas, the academic or the athletic or the aesthetic. It's all got to be a part of what we do. And Larry Deegan told me this one time. He was a supervisor of bands, my predecessor in that position. He said, if you can't teach your kids to play what you've picked out for them, if you can't teach them to play it in class, you picked the wrong piece. Said, because he says, now you kind of bluff them into telling them that they've got to practice this part at home. But you in your heart knows if you can't get them to play it in a rehearsal, you picked the wrong song. And so, but whatever you want the kids to do, you've got to teach them to do that. You're the teacher. You can't depend on them learning it on their own. You got some kids like Johnny Jacobs and Frank Buck that will go home and practice that horn for an hour and a half. Not the majority.
Few and far between.
That's not the majority of your kids. You're gonna have to teach them and do it with them. And when you're doing it, that fundamental stuff, that's what you got to concentrate on. If they haven't made a characteristic sound in your band rehearsal, they don't need to play Elsa's Procession. You know what I mean? You don't need to play some of these war horses unless you've worked those fundamentals tirelessly. And so how'd I get us off the subject here?
Well, I think anytime we're gathered together as people, we when there are things that are important to us, music is there. You have a football game, you got the national anthem. You got graduation. Well, we're going to have music there. Anytime people are gathered together for something that's important, if there's not music, it's like something has been left out. I think it's something that is just inbred in us, and I think you have talked about that very, very beautifully. One thing I definitely want you to touch on. I've heard so many people who are high school band directors playing some of the harder literature, and they're doing it well, and they say, well, let me tell you, Jake spent a lot of time in my band room, and we spent a lot of time talking over coffee. If I could have been a fly on the wall, what would have been some of the things that you were telling these guys that just seemed to make a difference?
Well, we've been talking about some of it already, that you've got to work on the fundamentals every day. You've got to work on characteristic tone. You've got to do it when you hear them play individually. And you've got to figure out a way to monitor their individual progress. Now, I realize that here's the way we did that at Minor, and I realize not everybody can do that, especially these days. But everybody had a Rubank book. Now, when I first started teaching, I worked with them one-on-one out of the Arbin book and the Close A book and the Universal book. I'd sit down beside them and we'd go through the grand methods. But when the band grew, it wasn't that quite feasible to spend 30 minutes with each kid. So we got in a Rubank book. Everybody was in a Rubank book, and they had a check mark on where they were. And quite frankly, this is not a boast. It is a fact that demonstrates how important we thought that was. On my podium, I could go around and tell you where everybody was, what book they were in, elementary, intermediate, advanced, and within 2 or 3 pages where they were. in that book because we were keeping up with it and it was posted on the wall. Now, of course, we can't do that anymore these days because it might hurt somebody's feelings.
Might hurt somebody's
And
feelings.
I can't, God help us, we can't change social flow, but you know, we wanted everybody to want to get to the end of the chart.
Yeah.
But-
Oh,
so-
absolutely.
And
Well-
but now you don't stop with that though. If you want the kids to play staccato, you're gonna have to teach them you're gonna have to work a little bit on staccato every day. If you want them to know how to play a phrase, you're gonna have to play a melody somewhere every day. You're gonna have to do all these regularly and do fundamentals and then take a fundamental approach. Another thing, Frank, is study the score.
Okay.
I found a lot of guys were not studying the score. They were not deciding who all had the melody at letter A and who all had the counter melody at letter B, and rehearsing those things together, knowing the sound, knowing the score, and don't create the concept of what you want this piece to sound like as you go through the rehearsal. You study the score and develop your concept when you're studying the score. And then when you go into that rehearsal every day, you're going to have something specific that you're going to fix that day. And I tried to construct my rehearsals like this. The beginning, and depending, how long this beginning part, how long that took, depends on whether it's in November or whether it's in April. Because certain things you establish and you can compress the amount of time that you spend on a given thing. But warm up, whatever fundamentals, articulation, tuning, phrasing, lip slurs, things that they're going to need to do. Playing in the upper register for the clarinets. I'm amazed right now at how many middle school clarinets never get over the break. That's not good, but you got to work on those things. And at Mott Field, and I see some people doing that now, going over the break for the clarinet's part of the warm-up that they do, and that's very good. But so you work on all those kind of fundamentals in your rehearsal. So you got your warm up and heavy duty emphasis on tone and blending. I won't throw this in there because maybe there's somebody that'll watch this that hadn't grasped this yet, and I know it was years before I really understood the difference in this. Blend and balance are not the same thing. Blend is a timbre issue. Balance is a volume issue. So when you're blending, you're trying to get the timbres to make a different color because they're mixed. And not you don't want a particular timbre to dominate, but that's not true when you're dealing just with a balance issue because the melody is supposed to be louder.
That's right. Yeah.
Than everybody else, and so but you've got to identify those things and work on them. But it's tremendous, and of course, mostly what I worked on, like with the chorales and things like that, was a blend issue. And we had what we called, and it was always and I used this with my adults, and we done some work with college band at UAB for a couple of years, but right after I retired. But I call it the home base tootie, and I guess if more people would understand what I mean if I called it the default tootie. That means
Okay.
when you don't know who's supposed to be, like if you just land on a chord, here's the blend we want to get. Here's how loud we want to, the trumpet's going to play. Here's how loud the clarinet's going to play. That's his home base. It's kind of like the marching bands. They very rarely use an 8-to-5 step anymore. Everything's adjusted. They just go from one
Right. Yeah.
step to the other. Back in when you and I were doing this, 8 to 5, we did everything was 8-to-5 or 6-to-5.
Yes.
Now
Mhm.
everything's an adjusted step. But one thing I've learned about those chords and the chord type bands, those bands, even though they don't have very, maybe even none, where they execute an 8-to-5 step, but they still practice it as a fundamental.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
if you're going to do an adjust step, you have to have
Yeah, adjusted
adjusted
from
from
something. Yeah,
That's right.
that's right.
So this is
Yeah.
the way I look about that 2D sound, the band. So we'd work a long time establishing that 2D sound. So the warm up is important, and do some tuning on a regular basis. But then the next part of my rehearsal would be something, and I'm going to teach you only maybe 8 bars, 16 bars. What we're going to get very detailed on this day. We're going to perfect this 16 measures. Going to get everybody playing the right notes, right rhythm, and the right style. You don't always achieve it, but that's what you're trying to do. And then the third part is you try to build up some momentum in your rehearsal in the third part of the rehearsal, and you go back and review what you had detailed the day before. And then as you go to the end of the rehearsal, you're playing through things that you have taught in detail and then reviewed several times, so that you're not stopping at the, every 3 or 4 seconds and fixing something. So, but the end, you always end with some continuity. I remember a certain community band conductor I used to play under. I'll say it would just make me so mad, because it would be 2 minutes before the end of the rehearsal, and he had cut it down to say, well, let me hear the bassoon and the oboes and the third trumpets right here in this measure. And so they play that measure and end on a dominant 7th chord, and he will say, "I thank y'all all for coming. See you next week." So what a letdown! I didn't even get to play the last note of the rehearsal, and they didn't even resolve the chord when they did that. So you don't want to do that. You want to play some, but at that point in the rehearsal, you're playing in a continuity mode, but you're playing things that you've already done detailed work on. So that's we try to restructure the individual rehearsal. Now, of course, the closer you get to concert, the more you got to play through stuff. I remember one time, well, it was my first year at Minor. We were playing the Suite in E flat, and I got up on the podium, and just as I was stepping up on the podium to play Suite in E flat, the thought occurred to me, we've never played straight through this. I would watch Larry Deegan. I practiced talk with him, and he was just like William Ravelli about just working just doggedly on a little bit. And so I do too. I value that, but you, at some point, you got to take what you got and go to the house, and I have not done that. I tell you what, we had played every measure and every phrase of that suite ad nauseum. I told them exactly how to play it. We had never gone from one phrase to the next one. And of course, we paid the price for it that day too.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I mean, this is really a workshop in itself, because so many people. Well, let's start at the beginning. Well, we'll play through the piece. Well, let's play through it again, and maybe there'll be fewer wrong notes. And the more we play through it, the better we'll get. Well, obviously, that was not the approach that you were taking. You went into the rehearsal, you knew what you wanted to get done.
Yeah, and
and
that's what
knew.
I'm talking, the score study. You need to know what's in there. Not only do you need to know the piece as, now I don't say you have to analyze everything, every chord in the piece, but
Mhm.
you do have done enough of it to know that is this all triads, or is it all a
Mhm.
tertium, or does it have some fourth chords in it, or does it have a major chord on the bottom and then a stack of fourths on top? You got to know the basic harmonic idiom of what's going on. You have to know, uh, you have to know enough about it to know the harmonic idiom that's being used. You know, like for example, John Williams,
Mhm.
famous, exciting stuff. I never hear anything in anything but John Williams wrote that's more than a seventh chord. He's, you know,
Mhm.
four notes in
Sure.
the chord. Most of it is triads, and boy, he can bring people out of their seats
They sure can.
with all those movie scores, and they're all awesome triads. Well, it helps you to know if that's what's going on in the music before you get up and try to rehearse it. And so,
Absolutely. Yeah.
so score study and being organized in the rehearsals, doing all the fundamentals every day, whatever if you want kids to know how to play two different kinds of staccato, you've got to work on that every day. And I do think a lot of people argue with me about this, talking about Harry Bejan. I came up in an era where the mantra was never stop a note with the tongue. All right. Well, so I thought that. That's the way I taught. Got up to Harry Bejan, and he said, no, everything is not a pear-shaped tone. He said the pros don't play that way.
Mhm.
Because when these notes are going by at a certain speed, you cannot stop the air between notes that are 16th notes at 120. You can't stop the air between those notes. So it's either going, and so if you really want it to be clean, you're going to have to use a stopped staccato or a closed staccato. And I bring that, so I totally believe that. And when he said that, I rebelled at it at first. I said, no, no. Uh, Frank MacArthur said, never stop a note. By the way, Frank MacArthur taught the best graduate course I ever had, even comparing it to Beecham, because it was all nuts and bolts stuff. And but then I began to think about what Harry Beecham was saying about, and how I played Hugler's Holiday. I stopped my notes. I stopped
Start
some notes.
with the tongue. Yeah. You have
That's the
to.
way
Yeah. Yeah.
when I did it, and I'm thinking about this flute player that I'm playing with in the symphony 5 nights a week, and what she sounds like when she's playing tongue 16th notes. No, she's and
It's stopping the
but
tongue. Yeah. Yeah.
it's because you've got to have a thing where the beginning of the next note also serves as the end of the previous note. But now this kind of stuff, if you want your kids to do that, and I tell you, if you're playing an old Rossini overture, where you got to go and you want your clarinet players to do that, that's a skill they have to learn. We would do that every day. Russell's book, Form 9 in
Mhm.
the scale drill. So whatever you do, and I'll tell you another thing too, that also goes for things like the détaché, the string players call it. which is basically, hey, you were an awesome junior high band director, and you know what I'm talking about, how hard it is to get kids to play march style, where there's
Get that
separation
separation, yeah.
because they either block the note off or they connect it. And so if you want kids to play, and it's high school kids as well, if you want to have a true march style détaché, which is basically a good head on the note and then a slight decay before a slight silence, D, 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 D. And in most middle school bands, I've worked with a couple of middle school bands all the time. Their tendency is either to do this, da, 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 or da, 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 da. You don't get da, 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 unless you teach them to do that and work on it every day. So those are the kinds of things you've got to work on, the fundamentals that are in the piece you're playing. You got to know what's in the piece you're playing. You got to have know who's got a textural. You got to do a textural analysis. Now, this is one thing you do have to do over the whole piece. You've got to know who's got what, who's got the melody, who's got the counter melody, who's got the chords, who's got, who texture is just strictly the assignment of the musical components. And you've got to do a textural analysis of the whole thing. You cannot be in doubt.
Yes.
I won't call names here, but a good friend of mine who's passed away now was talking about, he was talking about playing the suite in E flat. And that last movement, da, da, da. No, wait a minute, it's the second movement. Da, 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 dee, da, 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 da. He said, got down to the end of that, we were playing it up there on stage, and all of a sudden I heard somebody over here getting down towards the end, and I heard somebody back here go da da da. And I said, wow, I didn't. And then somebody else over here went da da da. And then somebody else went da da da. And I said, my God, I never knew that was there. All right. Well, so the thing about it is, in his band room, he couldn't hear all the parts, and he had never known that little fragment was going through the whole piece, and he was surprised and all of a sudden hearing that. Well, you see, that's what you're calling a textual analysis.
Yeah, it's in the score. Yeah,
that's right. Well, in fact, about the business, the whole piece is based on those three notes, but you know those things. And you got to, at some point in time, everybody's got the tune at this phrase, should play that tune just with the people that's got the tune.
Yeah.
And if you're playing Swearingen piece, everybody that's got da 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 should have played that together.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you got, even though it's that same little pattern, they still have to be balanced. You don't want that little rhythmic thing playing with the with the chord third dominating every sound. So that's part of it. And as far as playing that hard literature.
Yeah. Well, that definitely makes sense. And that's not the kind of thing that you necessarily hear when you're coming through classes in college. So these, this makes sense. I think this is why some of those guys who otherwise, their band sounded so good. And again, I would hear them talk about, well, Johnny Jacobs, he was in my band room a lot. And this gives us a little bit of insight into some of the things that were going on behind the scenes that are teachable, that are doable, but it's not things that everybody just knows. Johnny, I wish we had a half a day to continue with something, because there's so much knowledge there gained over the years. I so much appreciate you taking the time for this interview and sharing, the behind the scenes of your career and some of these things that I think will help a lot of people who are in the arena now to make their band sound better and have a good time doing it.
Well, you're so right, Frank. I've said for many years and I was just like everybody else when I first started. I thought I was going to be the fastest gun in the West. In fact, until I got a different self-concept in that regard, I didn't do all that great. It wasn't about me and what I knew and what I could prove. It was really about doing something for the kids.
Absolutely.
And creating some music that would mean something to them and that they would look back on their experience in the minor band. I'll use that because that's where I spent most of my time. And they would remember first a piece that they played that just really moved them. And that's what this is about. But I'm saying I didn't have the right attitude about this profession when I started. I got a lot better at it, especially after I became supervisor. But, that degree you get at Bachelor of Music Education or Bachelor of Arts, that's a learner's permit.
I think you're absolutely right.
That's all
Yes.
it is.
Yeah.
That's all it is. I know that. You just don't. You just don't get that first job knowing everything, and it's just it's continuous. I'm still learning something every day I go out. I still go out and teach 3 days a week, and I'm still learning. You just can't ever think now I've made it.
No,
Can't do that. It's not that
we're
way.
all becoming and getting better every
That's right.
day. Well, Johnny, again, thanks so much. Thanks for listening, everyone. Dr. Johnny Jacobs, Phi Beta Mu Hall of Fame member.